So this is pre-recorded earlier.
So this
Here we
is
go.
an interview with Paul over the phone. Paul from the Young Lords, and he's going to give us information about the meeting today. Go ahead, Paul. Take over. Okay, so like you said, my name is Paul. I am the deputy chairman of the Young Lords here in Chicago, representing all of Illinois. And earlier today, I was at a meeting with PSL and other representatives of the community, and we were talking about the situations going on here in Chicago with police brutality, also with the curfew on the youth, and how to work with the youth. And during the meeting, some of the questions that came up was, how do you work with the youth? What programs and things need to be done? And so as the Young Lords are involved, we do have some youth programs that we work with. We really try to work with a lot of the gang youth to get them to understand certain systematic issues that we have within the city. A lot of people don't realize that coming from the city of Chicago, a lot of these gang problems started with white gangs in the 60s. And a lot of the gangs that are now around that people criticize started off as social clubs to protect themselves from these white gangs and from police. So the issue is, when we start looking at the gang problems here now in our current times, people don't realize that this is decades of systematic issues, from lack of resources on food and clothing, lack of, educational programs, lack of community service programs and healthcare. All of this ties into why we're having such issues with the youth that people are complaining about. Now, I will say, you may hear some horns going on right now. I am actually out in the streets in Humboldt Park right now, checking on a couple of the areas that we work with and making sure that the people that we work with are doing okay. Yesterday, during the parade, so that was June 11th, 2022, we were out on Washtenaw and Division Street in the heart of Humboldt Park, working with the community, working with a ally that we have in that neighborhood. And what happened was, we started to realize some of the stuff that was going on. There was an overwhelming police presence on Division Street. And when I say overwhelming, it was almost as if it was a police occupation of a community. Every block there was about 15 to 20 police officers. There was cop cars everywhere. You couldn't even look in one direction without seeing about 5 or 6 cops. And that's at the small end. And what did they do? They did absolutely nothing. I saw them yesterday grab a kid so hard they yanked him out of his shoes. 6 cops grabbed this young man so hard and spun him around and threw him in handcuffs and was choking him and yanked him out of his shoes. Only to let him go 5 minutes later because they had nothing on him that they could arrest him for. So that physical force was uncalled for. About 20 minutes later, again, there was an incident that happened at a store, the Family Dollar on Division Street, and again, police swarmed over there. There was about 45 cops at the very minimum, grabbing people, throwing people around. They grabbed this young man by his neck and spun him around. Again, nobody got arrested because they didn't have anything to arrest people on, except for people acting rowdy, maybe talking loud or loitering or gathering in a situation. But again, manhandling young teenage kids with excessive force. During that same time, on Division Street, there was a bombazo going on with musicians, families, kids, pregnant women, all listening to this music on Division Street.
All peaceful.
All peaceful. The cops, all that big security presence that was happening at that time for that small incident at the Dollar General we're still all out there. Gangs on the north side of Division Street were all on Division and Washtenaw. A gang from the south side of Division came out, and there was an exchange of words. The cops watched these young men exchange words, throw gang signs, taunt each other. The south side, the gang on the south side of the street started to walk towards the Bombazo. The cops saw the gang on the north side of the street, followed them into the crowd where the Bombazo was going on, didn't intervene, didn't try to say, hey, you know what, you guys go one way, let them go the other way. No, they let them get all the way up to Rockwell, right where the crowd was, which was maybe about 5 businesses in from Rockwell. The cops at Rockwell throw on their sirens, people scatter, the gang scatter. They end up fighting right in front of the crowd of people and families that were there watching the Bombazo. It took the cops a minute to respond because, again, they were all standing on the corner talking to each other, not paying attention to the direct situation that they put a bunch of families in danger of. So myself and my sergeant at arms, another young lord, actually walked down behind these gangs and stood between the crowd of people and the fighting going on between the cops and the 2 sets of gang members right in the middle of this Division Street because the street was closed down for traffic, so there was no cars or anything passing. Again, you have this heavy cop presence, and they didn't do anything because they're not there to protect the people. They actually put the people in danger by allowing both sets to walk into a crowd of women and children and families.
So what you're saying is that this is orchestrated, which I believe is also because they know what the end results would be if they let these guys get together, right? I mean,
yeah, which means next year they're going to want more police presence, more overtime dollars, more bonuses for them to go out and patrol the next Puerto Rican festival because they allowed an incident to occur that got videotaped. And I know there's footage out there because there was a bunch of people out there with their phones. Unfortunately, we couldn't record anything because we were too busy trying to stand in between the crowd and the fighting going on.
Paul, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Right now in history, and as we are right now in Chicago and about Puerto Rico, my impression is that we need to educate the kids that are out there now, and especially in the neighborhood over there, because there's a lot of things that are going on that people who are supposed to be for Puerto Ricans are really not, Paul, and that's the sad part.
This is true. This is very true. I'm going to quote a comrade from another organization. The organization is For the People, or FTP. And my comrade had said that with the work that we're doing with these gangs, that these young gang members are revolutionaries that are pointed in the wrong direction. Now let that sink in. Revolutionaries that are pointed in the wrong direction. And I agree with that because they are fighting. They are warriors. They just don't know what they're fighting for. They're fighting for the wrong things instead of realizing all the systematic issues that are keeping them fighting each other instead of fighting the system. So the moment they turn around and use that mentality to start fighting against, police brutality, start fighting against healthcare issues, abortion rights, the mass incarceration of Black and Latino people, the enslavement of Puerto Rico, and yes, I'm going to use the term enslavement because let's be honest, nobody in Puerto Rico is free. They're considered third, fourth-class citizens. They talk about independence, they get disappeared. There's decades and centuries of violence towards Puerto Rican people on the island, so you cannot consider them free. They are enslaved, and they are enslaved to the point where they have to bow to an American ideology that has no right or reason to be in Puerto Rico.
Correct.
How is it that Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. but gets hit with the Jones Act, which
systematically destroys Puerto Rico. How is that free? Now tell me, do me a favor and explain to the people who are going to listen to this what the Jones Act is. The Jones Act is like, it's the equivalent of the embargo on Cuba, in my point of view. It means that any import-export coming out of Puerto Rico has to go through the United States. So a lot of these companies that, instead of getting direct shipments from, wherever they're purchasing their orders from, even if the food or anything is coming from a country that is closer to Puerto Rico than the U.S., the ships have to go into the U.S., they have to be documented there, and it has to be American companies that bring it to Puerto Rico. What's the effect? The effect is higher prices, longer turnaround times. When the hurricane hit, there was food that excuse my language, there was food that went and rotted on docks because the ships had to port in the U.S. first before they shipped out to Puerto Rico, which means that the food spoiled before it could get to the people that needed it. And this is what that Jones Act does. It not only cripples the economy in Puerto Rico, it also cripples the ability for Puerto Ricans in the case of a natural disaster to get the resources and the supplies that they need. And then on top of that, you then privatize the electricity, and you privatize the water, and you privatize everything else that you can get your hands on. And what do you got? You got a whole nation, because they're not a state. They should be their own nation. You have a whole nation at the whim of American politics, American politicians, and American corporations. Prior to all of this, American invasion of Puerto Rico in 1898. Puerto Rico, do you agree or not, was stable? They fed themselves and they had a system. Their currency, their peso at the time was 40% more. So what the first thing the U.S. did was cripple their economy because their economy was doing well. They had sugar that people wanted. They had coffee. They had a diversity of different products that they created, from tobacco to coffee to the sugar crops and also crops that were grown locally to sustain the people. But then U.S. invades, the big industries of coffee and sugar and tobacco are privatized and bought up by American companies. And I don't even want to say bought up. They were pretty much a corporate hostile takeover of independent farms. And now you have the Domino Sugar Company as one of the biggest exploiters of Puerto Rican people from centuries ago, still exploiting Puerto Rican people. And once you do that, then they start exploiting the land. So instead of having land that was still growing crops that sustained the Puerto Rican people on culturally appropriate crops, they expand the sugar, they expand the coffee, they expand the tobacco, and cut those farms down. Now, the Puerto Rican people are dependent on produce that is shipped in from the U.S., from the Midwest and other parts of the U.S., which, again, have to go through this rigorous Jones Act just to get to Puerto Rico. And now you have a country, again, or a nation, that is dependent on the U.S. for survival, while you've already cut their peso down by 40 cents on the dollar. So you just pretty much almost took half of everybody's life savings in one full swoop. And then you make them dependent on produce and everything else that comes into the country, where they're not self-sustaining because too many American corporations and American people own and privatize the property in Puerto Rico. So
a mass exodus throughout the histories at key points in Puerto Rican history to the U.S. to where, first they were going to New York, and then after New York, Florida and all of that became the central hub. And then now, you have them spread out to as far as Chicago and even further. Milwaukee's got a beautiful Puerto Rican population that's growing up there. But the diaspora is constantly being pushed out. There's more Puerto Rican people that live on the mainland than there is on the island because we can't even afford to live on the island.
Hawaii too.
Hawaii are that. Those are shit. That's our relative struggle right there. Our sister struggle. The island of Hawaii is facing the same issues that we are, and they should have their independence as well. But again, U.S. corporate capitalist society and the U.S. politicians will not allow these nations to be free because of corporate interests.
Yes.
Of course. There's too much money involved. It comes down to money and greed.
Yep, money and greed. Power as well.
Yeah.
The Puerto Rican people were guinea pigs for medical advancements, and I don't even like to call them advancements, but they, medical testing that was happening on Puerto Rican women, where they were being forcefully sterilized against their will.
Now, I'm glad you said that because that ties in over. I'm in Chicago now, but it ties in over there in South Dakota and North Dakota with the Sioux. With my see, I got cousins. My father was Mexican. He had a cousin, and his cousin married. Richard Solori married Dakota Sioux women. So over there, they got the same thing. The same people that invaded over there, that went over there and fucked and crushed them, were the same ones that went to Puerto Rico. Plus, when they did those experiments on the Puerto Rican women, they did it on the Indian women from también over here in the Sioux reservation. So we got to tie with them. Yes.
Puerto Rican women, Mexican women, black women,
Yes.
all of our women, and
Black women too, yeah.
Right now, the same ideology, the same white capitalist conservative men are trying to do it again by abolishing abortion rights and the woman's right to her own body, because again, women have always been the target of the oppression. If you oppress the women and you sterilize them and make them submissive,
But I believe, yeah,
a nation
that is,
reproduce, then we can't have more Puerto Ricans if our Puerto Rican women are being
Right.
sterilized.
That's true.
American women, if we're not being sterilized, same thing with the African American community.
Yeah.
Because again, you break and cripple them to the point where they have to, they can't reproduce, and when they do, you make the products available to them not nourishing for the babies, not nourishing for the mother, so the babies and the mom then have deficiencies that lead to other genetic deficiencies that lead to malnutrition and other diseases that they shouldn't have, but we only can afford certain things, and so our children are given the crap of the crops that they have and end up with the health care issues.
so it does seem in the whole scheme of history, this is what I'm talking about. Now, I'm a person that I've been studying all my life. And I'm Puerto Rican, like I said, which is really important to me. But the thing is this, in the whole scheme of things and everything I see, it appears that the general people that are in charge, which are Europeans, appear to want to exterminate everything that has to do with everything that's not European.
That is correct. Even down to religion. That is 100% correct. They took our language, they took our religion, they took our customs, they sterilized our women, raped our women, bastardized our men, humiliated our men, killed our men, and then created systems that kept the population where only a few percent, yes, a few percent can make it out. But that few percent does not, just because 10, 15 make it out and succeed in this capitalist world that they've created, that doesn't mean the rest of us can.
Correct.
You know, we don't have that generational wealth that is handed down. We don't have those government jobs that you get to keep your salary after you've been discredited or you've decided to retire, but yet you still create a salary and collect the salary on the American taxpayer dollar. None of this system, from any portion of it, any of those amendments were never written for us. They weren't even written for women, even white women at the time. They were meant for white European men to stay in power.
And the ones who had owned property.
And the property owners and the corporations and the
Right.
business, you know, those people with the power are the ones that get to stay in power. But what people don't realize and what we need to express to the people, anybody that's listening to this, is there's more of us than
Anybody that will be listening to this.
Exactly. Anybody listening or will be listening, there's more of us than them. There's more people than they have enough bullets to take down. You know? And it's unfortunate that our same brothers and sisters join the military, they join the police force, and they uphold these ideologies that are killing their own people under guise of being patriotic. Patriotic to what? A system that has crippled you? Patriotic to a country that has manipulated your family members, that have executed your family members and called them terrorists?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why are we going to be patriotic to that? Why should I stand and put my hand over my heart for the American flag when the American flag has done nothing for my people except for exterminate us, kill us, enslave us, rape us, murder us in the street?
Now, Paul,
Let me tell you something, and this is real. When I was, it had to be 80. I'm gonna look. I got the cards. When I was like in 81, I went, or 80, to Hayuya. And when I was there, I get to meet my aunt, great aunt, Blanca Canales, in the real herself, personal. She was already gray haired. She had a dress that went down to her and like her legs, and she had some like prison gym shoes that you wear. So I stood with her for like 2 months, and she trained me on this shit. And what she told me was that we're not against the American Pueblo. It's the government that sucks. That we're against. And even the American Pueblo is against the American government.
look at all these people. Ruby Ridge. Waco. A lot more. What do you think about that?
I agree. I mean,
Are we against
The people, or are we against the government?
no, we are not against the people. And I will say, even as one of the tenets that will be coming out for the Young Lords as we start to redevelop the 13-point program and everything else, as we're working on it, one of the things that we believe is you cannot fight oppression by being an oppressor. What I mean by that is that not only are we demanding and fighting for the liberation of Puerto Rico, we believe that we need to fight for the liberation of that had a system that the U.S. had intervened on because the U.S. could not allow a communist country to be successful, so that Chile and Venezuela and Colombia and, all of our relatives in South America, Central America, even our relatives in North America, all the way up to the tip of Canada,
should be free to decide for themselves.
Exactly. And so we're not against the American people. No, because there's huge numbers of American people here that are suffering under these same circumstances. They may not be suffering under the Jones Act, but we all share a suffrage under health care. We all suffer a suffrage under living wages that the people earn. We're all suffering under police brutality and corporation greed and mistreatment of the people, food sovereignty. How is it that we're a quote unquote first powerful nation and Flint, Michigan still ain't got clean water? How is it that we are leaving it up to the small number of tribes that are left after genocide by the American government to fight for our water access without standing with them? How is that? The people that have faced genocide are the ones still facing genocide to protect our water, and people are not even realizing the suffrage that they've went through. But once that water source is gone, it's gone. Look at Flint. The same things the U.S. government will chastise and invade a country for are the same things that it has done throughout its history. We've invaded countries as an American force.
Yep.
For genocide, but at the same time we're committing genocide. They have talked about segregation and brutality while still segregating and having Jim Crow laws at the same time. They've invaded countries for, murdering civilians and journalists and activists. Well, murdering civilians, journalists, and activists. Everything that the U.S. government has said that they have stood against, at the same time, in that point in history, we're doing the same actions here in the U.S. So no, we're not against American people. We stand with the American people, but we stand with those that are fighting for their own right to survive, fighting for their own right to live, and fighting for their own right to thrive in a country that is not set for them to live or thrive in.
Yeah, so
Those things are all. So, what do you think is the best thing right here? I'm talking about Chicago right now. Now, Chicago is the focal point, and I always said that in order for us to get something going with the movement for the independence of Puerto Rico, which is that's the main target. We need to help the kids. We need to educate the kids that are here in Chicago to let them know the history and the value and what's really going on. Because, like, when I went to Lane Tech, my history was like, when I went to Lane Tech, they made me feel like they tried to make me feel, but I was already a renegade. I went to Lane Tech, I was 13, 14. They were racist over there, bro. Big time. I went in that bitch, I remember his name, Burns. He hated Puerto Ricans. Man, I went over to the gay lords, tried to fuck with me, and I stood up to them. And I came with a gun and put it to them, and I got arrested. When I came back, all those bitches, they were big-ass blancos. They used to shake. When they see me, they shook. I was a little kid, Puerto Rican, though. And I put everywhere, FALN, nigga. Fuck yous. I was fucking crazy. But I really didn't know what I was doing. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing